Your hands go numb before you even open your eyes. Frost lines the inside of the shelter wall, an arm's length from your face. Outside, the wind hasn't stopped in 3 days. It won't stop tomorrow either. This isn't a storm you wait out. This is your winter. Every winter. For thousands of years in a row. If your heating failed tonight, you'd probably survive. Cold, miserable, maybe scared. But you'd survive. Your ancestors didn't get that guarantee. For tens of thousands of years, entire human populations lived through some of the harshest climate swings our species has ever faced. One bad decision about shelter, fire, or food could end everything by morning. So how did they make it through? Start with the cold itself. During the height of the last ice age, roughly 20,000 years ago, average global temperatures sat several degrees below today's. That sounds small. It wasn't. Glaciers buried huge stretches of North America and Europe under ice over a mile thick. Sea levels dropped so far that land bridges opened between continents. Winters in places like modern-day Ukraine and Russia could stay below freezing for months without a single thaw. Humans were not built for this. Not by nature. No fur thick enough. No fat layer close to what a wolf or a mammoth carried. Everything that kept you alive in that world had to be invented, carried, and remembered. Food was the first problem, long before warmth. On open steppe, plants barely grew for 9 months of the year. So survival meant timing your entire life around animal migration. Reindeer and horses moved in predictable seasonal routes, following the most reliable grazing left under the snow. Ancient hunters learned those routes the way you might learn a bus schedule, except getting it wrong didn't mean a late arrival. It meant starvation. At river crossings and narrow valley passes, archaeologists have found dense clusters of animal bone, far too concentrated to be random kills. These were ambush points, used again and again, year after year, generation after generation. Knowledge like that wasn't written down. It lived in memory, passed from an older hunter to a younger one, refined slightly with each retelling. Lose that knowledge, and an entire group's yearly food supply could vanish with it. And once an animal was killed, the work had barely started. Meat spoils fast, even in the cold. So Ice Age groups dug storage pits straight into the permafrost, the permanently frozen ground that never fully thaws. A pit like that worked exactly like a natural freezer, keeping meat edible for months. Some groups also dried strips of meat over low fires, removing the moisture that bacteria need to grow, a method that still shows up today in jerky and biltong. Take clothing. Anthropologist Ian Gilligan has spent years studying when humans actually started wearing tailored fitted clothes, not just draped skins. His research points to a striking pattern. Clothing technology gets dramatically more sophisticated exactly when the climate gets dramatically colder. Not before. Not as a fashion choice. As a survival response, timed almost perfectly to the worst stretches of the Ice Age. And we know what that clothing looked like because of something most people never think to look for: tiny holes. At sites linked to the Upper Paleolithic period, the time spanning roughly 50,000 to 12,000 years ago, archaeologists keep finding eyed needles, carved from bone and ivory, thin as a matchstick, with a small drilled hole at one end. Not crude awls for punching skins. Needles for stitching layered fitted garments. Garments built to trap air against the body. The same principle your winter coat still uses today. Archaeologist Olga Soffer pushed this even further. Studying Venus figurines, small carved female forms found across Ice Age Europe, she noticed something in the surface texture that earlier researchers had dismissed as decoration. Tiny, repeating patterns. Soffer argued they were impressions of actual woven textiles, net-like fabric pressed into the clay or stone before it hardened. If she's right, humans were weaving complex cloth tens of thousands of years earlier than anyone had assumed. Not after farming. Long before it. Clothing alone wasn't enough, though. You needed shelter that could hold heat through a night that lasted 16 hours. So let's reconstruct one of those nights. You're not in a cave. Most Ice Age Europeans weren't. You're on open, treeless steppe where there's almost no wood for miles. What there is, instead, is bone. Mammoth bone, left behind by animals that died of natural causes or were hunted at river crossings. At a site called Mezherich in modern Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered the remains of dwellings built almost entirely from mammoth bones. Skulls stacked as a foundation. Long bones arranged as support beams. Tusks curved overhead like ribs, anchoring a covering of hide stretched tight against the wind. Building one of these took planning most people never give the Ice Age credit for. The bones from roughly 15 to 20 mammoths went into a single dwelling. That's not one lucky kill. That's accumulated material, gathered and stored, possibly over years, possibly scavenged as much as hunted. Someone had to decide where to build. Someone had to decide which bones fit where. Someone had to keep that knowledge and pass it on. Inside, a hearth burned at the center, fed by bone grease and whatever wood or dung could be found, because bone alone catches fire reluctantly, but burns slow and hot once it does. Smoke curled up through a gap at the top. Bodies huddled close, sharing warmth the way the architecture itself seemed designed to encourage. Why does any of this matter beyond the engineering? Because survival in that world was never really an individual project. It was a group project, and the evidence for that runs deeper than bone huts. At a burial site called Sungir, also in present-day Russia, archaeologists found something that doesn't fit the popular image of Ice Age life as a grim, bare-knuckled scramble to exist. 2 children, buried head to head, covered in roughly 10,000 carefully carved ivory beads each. Each bead, experimental archaeologists have estimated, took close to an hour to make by hand. Do the math on 10,000 of them, doubled, and you're looking at years of collective labor poured into a single burial. Beside the children lay something even stranger. Long, perfectly straight spears, carved from mammoth tusk. Ivory doesn't grow straight. It curves naturally, the way a tusk curves on the living animal. Straightening, it requires heating the material very precisely, then bending it slowly against that natural curve without snapping it. Modern craftspeople who've tried to replicate the technique describe it as exacting, slow, and easy to ruin. Someone at Sungir had mastered it well enough to make ceremonial weapons for a grave. That's not a society barely scraping by. That's a society with enough surplus, enough organization, and enough emotional investment to spend years honoring 2 children who didn't survive to adulthood. Here's the twist most people don't expect. The Ice Age, the period we picture as humanity's bleakest stretch, may have been one of the great accelerators of human cooperation and culture. Harsh, unpredictable cold doesn't just kill the unprepared. It punishes anyone who tries to go it alone. Hunting mammoth safely takes a coordinated group, not a lone spear. Surviving a multi-week storm takes shared shelter, shared fuel, shared food stores. The cold didn't just threaten human survival. In a strange way, it built the social glue that made survival possible at all. You can see traces of that glue in cave art from the same general era. Sites like Chauvet Cave in France preserve paintings of lions, horses, and rhinoceroses, rendered with a confidence and observational skill that took real transmitted training to produce. Someone learned to paint like that. Someone taught them. That's culture, passed hand to hand, exactly the kind of social investment that thrives when survival depends on the group rather than the individual. So picture the full scene now. A bone hearth glowing low at the center of a mammoth bone dwelling. Stitched, layered clothing keeping bodies warm enough to sleep. Stored food and fuel, planned months in advance. Children wrapped in beadwork that took years to make, not because beads were needed to survive the night, but because the people who made them had enough stability and enough love to spend that time anyway. Now bring it back to you. Most of us will never face a winter like that. Heating systems, Insulated buildings and grocery stores have erased the kind of cold that could end a family in a single bad night. But the instinct underneath all of it hasn't gone anywhere. You still gather with people when things get hard. You still build shelter, literal or otherwise, with whoever you trust most. You still invest time and care into the people you love, far beyond what bare survival would require. Think about the last time you helped someone move, or sat up late with a friend who was struggling, or spent hours on something for a person who'd never know exactly how long it took. None of that was strictly necessary. It rarely is. But it's the same impulse that strung 10,000 beads by hand. The same impulse that taught a stranger's hands how to straighten ivory without breaking it. Scarcity didn't erase generosity in the Ice Age. If anything, it sharpened it, because everyone understood, without needing to say it out loud, that no one made it through alone. That instinct isn't new. It's not even close to new. It's the same one that drilled 10,000 holes into ivory beads for 2 children who would never grow up. The same one that taught hands how to stitch a coat tight enough to survive a steppe winter. The same one that turned mammoth bones into a roof. Your hands go numb before you even open your eyes. But you're not alone in that shelter. You never were. And for roughly 100,000 years, that was the whole secret.